Hello, mathematicians. Today we're going to be learning about decimals, more specifically how to divide with decimals, and we'll be using word problems as examples. To get us started, here we have a word problem that says a group spends $46.08 on snacks. If 9 friends share the cost equally, how much does each pay? So we know that the snacks cost $46.08 in total. We're going to divide because the friends are sharing the cost equally, and we're going to be dividing by 9 because there are 9 friends. Basically, we're taking the total cost, dividing it by the 9 friends to figure out the amount that each friend pays. So let's go ahead and divide. We first ask ourselves, how many times does 9 go into 4? And 9 does not go into 4, so we ask ourselves, how many times does 9 go into 46? And 9 goes into 46 5 times because 9 times 5 is equal to 45. So 46 minus 45 is equal to 1. And then we get to this decimal point, so we bring that up. And we bring down the 0. Now we ask ourselves, how many times does 9 go into 10? And 9 goes into 10 one time because 9 times 1 is equal to 9. So now we're going to go ahead and subtract. 10 minus 9 is equal to 1. And then we're going to bring down the 8. And we ask ourselves, how many times does 9 go into 18? 9 goes into 18 2 times because 9 times 2 is equal to 18. So we're going to go ahead and subtract. And 18 minus 18 is equal to 0. So there's no remainder here. So what this means is if we take the total cost and divide it by the 9 friends, each friend ends up paying $5.12. Here we have our next example, which says a chef has 25 pounds of sugar. Each dessert recipe needs 5/10 pounds. How many desserts can the chef make? So we know that the chef has 25 pounds in sugar. We know that each dessert has the same amount, which is 5/10 pounds. So we're going to take 25 and divide that by 5/10. And what we're doing here is we're taking the total sugar, dividing it by the amount of sugar each dessert takes to figure out the number of desserts the chef could make. So let's go ahead and divide. When we're dividing by a decimal, so if our divisor is a decimal, we're going to want to make it a whole number to make it a little easier to divide. In order to do that, we're going to go ahead and multiply it by 10, so that lets us move that decimal point one space to the right. However, if I do that to my divisor, I need to do that to my dividend. And now, look at the divisor. We have a whole number divisor, which makes it much easier to divide. So now we have 250 divided by 5, which is the same thing as 25 divided by 5/10. We'll get the same answer. So let's go ahead and divide. We ask ourselves, how many times does 5 go into 2? But 5 does not go into 2. So we ask ourselves, how many times does 5 go into 25, which is 5, because 5 times 5 is equal to 25. And 25 minus 25 is equal to 0. So let's go ahead and bring down that other 0, and we ask ourselves, how many times does 5 go into 0? 5 goes into 0 0 times because 5 times 0 is equal to 0. And so our quotient here is 50. So that means that 25 divided by 5/10 is equal to 50, meaning the chef can make 50 desserts. Here we have our next problem, which says a container holds 5 20/100 liters of juice. Each bottle can hold 6/10 liters. How many bottles can be filled? Well, we know that in total we have 5 and 2800ths liters of juice, and each bottle is going to hold the same amount, which is 6/10 liters. And in order to figure out how many bottles can be filled, we're going to go ahead and divide 5 and 2800ths divided by 6/10. Now, basically what we're doing is we're taking the total amount of juice, dividing it by how many liters fit per bottle to figure out the number of bottles that can be filled. So let's go ahead and divide. We're going to take 5 and 2800ths and divide that by 6/10. Remember that when our divisor is a decimal, we're going to want to make it a whole number to make it easier for us to divide. So because we have 6/10, we're going to go ahead and multiply this by 10 to make it a whole number. And the trick is, if we're multiplying by 10, we can move this decimal point one space to the right. And whatever we do to our divisor, we're going to do to our dividend as well. So we're going to take that and multiply it by 10. So we could go ahead and move our decimal point. And so we're going to rewrite this problem so it's a little easier to look at. And basically now we have 52 and 8/10 divided by 6, which would give us the same answer as 5 and 2800ths divided by 6/10. So we ask ourselves, how many times does 6 go into 5? And 6 does not go into 5. So we ask ourselves, how many times does 6 go into 52? And 6 goes into 52 8 times because 6 times 8 is equal to 48. So 52 minus 48 is equal to 4. And now we're going to go ahead and bring up this decimal point and bring down the 8. And now we ask ourselves, how many times does 6 go into 48? And 6 goes into 48 8 times because 6 times 8 is equal to 48. So now we're going to go ahead and subtract 48 minus 48 is equal to 0. So we do not have a remainder. So that means that 5 and 2800ths liters of juice divided by 6/10 liters per bottle is equal to 8 and 8/10 bottles that can be filled. That's basically 8 full bottles and part of another one. Here we have our final problem, which says a roll of fabric is 7 and 5/10 meters long. Each scarf needs 2500ths meters. So how many scarves can be made? We know that in total we have 7 and 5/10 meters of fabric. And we know that each scarf takes the same amount of fabric, which is 2500ths. So we're going to go ahead and take 7 and 5/10 and divide that by 2500ths. So we're going to take the total amount of fabric we have divided by the amount of fabric needed to make a scarf to figure out the number of scarves we can make. Now let's go ahead and divide. We're going to take 7 and 5/10 and divide that by 2500ths. And remember that when our divisor is a decimal, we're going to have to multiply it so that it's a whole number. And in this case, we need to move our decimal point 2 spaces to the right. So multiplying it by just 10 will not be enough. So we have to multiply it by 100. So that will allow us to move this decimal point 2 spaces to the right. And whatever we do to our divisor, we have to do to our dividend. So we're also going to multiply that by 100. But here, in order to move the decimal point 2 spaces to the right, we're going to have to add a 0 and then move our decimal point. Now let's take that problem and rewrite it so that it's easier for us to divide. So first, we're going to ask ourselves, how many times does 25 go into 7? And 25 cannot go into 7, so we ask ourselves, how many times could 25 go into 75? And 25 could go into 75 3 times. And that's because 25 times 3 is equal to 75. So 75 minus 75 is equal to 0. We're going to bring down the 0, and then we ask ourselves, how many times could 25 go into 0? And 25 times 0 is equal to 0. So we're going to put the 0 on top and subtract by 0, and our remainder is 0. So that means that 7 5/10 divided by 25 hundredths is equal to 30. So we're able to make 30 scarves.